Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Vet Chats, where we help veterans share their awesome stories and keep positivity going throughout the veteran community. Vet Chats is also available on Reese Across America Radio. We are played Mondays at 9 p.m. and Saturdays at 2 p.m., 3 p.m. Wow. They have a ton of great veteran content that I know you'll appreciate, so be sure to check them out. You can find them at iHeartRadio, the Odyssey app, or their website. It's good to be back. It's been a few weeks, and I'm so happy to come back, especially with an incredible guest as Marty. Let me introduce him a little bit. So he's the editor-in-chief of Task and Purpose and a U.S. Army veteran with multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. And most recently, he has co-authored Send Me, The True Story of a Mother at War with Joe Kent. This incredibly moving story is about the life and service of Senior Chief Petty Officer Shannon Kent, who was killed in action in Syria in 2019. We'll be talking about this more tonight. He has been covering the military and conflict for over 10 years, reporting on the ground from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Ukraine, in addition to embedding with the U.S. military for training exercises around the world. Previously, he was the founding editor-in-chief of both the Havoc Journal and Coffee or Die magazine, and he's also the author of Violence of Action. You guys, I'm so excited. I see he has requested, so let's get on. All right. Marty!
What's up?
Hello, how are you? How was your weekend?
Good. Had a long week out promoting the book. Went down to Maryland to talk to some folks, and then out to Salt Lake City, and back home now. And yeah, still stoked that you're having me on finally.
Well, I'm glad I could get you booked because dang, you're cruising across the country. I mean, really, you need to make the rounds and get this book right here in as many hands as possible because it is incredible. It is one of those life-changing books. Yes. Um, and I'm glad that we waited to do this chat because I'm so glad I got to read
Yeah.
it. And also, I just finished it last night, so it's all I've been thinking about, and it's something, especially as a mother, it's something that you can't stop thinking about. It's literally life changing. Um, so I'm excited to chat about it with you, and you have been in the journalism space for quite some time now. I wanted to know in 2019 when this happened, how did it first come across you, and what was your initial reaction?
Yeah, so being in the news space, of course, I saw the initial headlines about a suicide bomber attack in Manbij, Syria. Saw the initial reports of 4 Americans killed, and then, of course, it usually takes 24 hours for next of kin to happen before they release names. I still remember seeing the names released the next day, and the way that the thing that first stuck out to me was the way it was being characterized was it was a group of American service members kind of going out to lunch. And it almost felt like they were being described as a group of people out for like a joyride in a war zone almost, or maybe
Right.
let their guard down because they were going out for lunch and I remember looking at when they released the names in the short bios, I'm like, okay, we've got a former Navy SEAL working for the DIA, Scotty Wirtz. We've got Chief Jonathan Farmer, a Green Beret. We've got Shannon Kent, who was described as a cryptological technician linguist in the Navy, and then an American Syrian, Gadir Tahir, who was with them as a translator. And you just look at this group of people, and right away, my sort of spidey sense was going off of like, I don't think that these folks were out to lunch. Like,
Right.
and my initial assumption was, oh, they're describing it that way because they can't say what they were really doing. It wasn't until not even a couple weeks later, my boss at the time, Evan Hafer, over at Black Rifle Coffee, he was like, "Hey, did you see the news about that explosion in Syria?" Yeah. He's like, "Okay, well, I'm going to introduce you to Joe Kent. That's the husband of Shannon, one of the people killed. He wants to get the story out there." And I'm like, okay, Roger, yeah, let's make the intro. And so I hopped on the phone with Joe, and he kind of confirmed right off the bat, like, yeah, they weren't out to lunch. This wasn't going out to lunch crowd. And I think
Right.
from what he's told me since then, his initial motivation for wanting to tell the story was, hey, his wife and everybody involved deserved more credit than being painted as just gallivanting around town, trying to pick up a Subway sandwich or whatever, right? Like, that's not fair. And he said, if they would have initially characterized it as, hey, they were out pursuing the enemies of the United States or something, even something generic like that, maybe he
Right.
would have. Maybe he would have never wanted to tell the story, because ultimately they come from a community of quiet professionals, and but it was because of the way that they characterized it. He's like, no, like, we need to set the record straight. And so I, from there, he was like, okay, we're going to have her memorial service out here in Annapolis. Come to find out, this was the first time in naval history that they had allowed an enlisted sailor to have their memorial service at the Naval Academy's chapel. First time ever. So already it was like, okay, this is not your average service member to die in combat. Not that anybody is average who dies in combat. They're all heroes and deserve our ultimate respect. But it very quickly was starting to realize that Shannon was anything but normal or average. And so I went down, met with Joe at their family home where him and Shannon had been raising their boys. Their boys were only 1 and 3 years old at the time when she was killed. And did that initial interview with him, and then went out to the memorial service. I believe I was the only media allowed in there. And then from there, that was at that memorial service where it was kind of a who's who of the most sort of elite levels of the special operations and intelligence community. And kind of realized, hearing them talk, that, like, wow, this is somebody really, really unique. And I don't know that I'm going to be able to do them justice, do Shannon justice in just a single article. And, that night I remember telling Joe, like, hey, I'm sure everybody's probably hitting you up about this, but I'd like to throw my hat in the ring if you're considering a book. And, to his credit, he was very sort of non-committal. He's like, yeah, man, let's, we'll see. And I think he probably, wanted it because, Times was writing a profile, Washington Post was writing a profile, Stars and Stripes. He probably wanted to see, like, how these all turned out and go with whoever did the best job, rightfully so.
Right.
It wasn't until a couple months later, May 14th, I believe it was. So just like, a couple days ago, 5 years ago, that I published my story in Coffee or Die, the Legend of Chief Shannon Kent. And it was like a 5,000 or 6,000 word feature on Shannon. But still, even doing that long story, especially for a digital audience, that's a long story. It did really well. Did my best with that amount, but I still felt like, hey, I didn't have enough real estate to really do Shannon's story justice. And it was maybe a couple of hours after I published that story that Joe reached out and was like, hey, dude, great job. Me and the rest of the family really think that you did the best job of everybody sort of, really showing who Shannon was. And yeah, let's do a book. And that kind of started, that was kind of the beginning of this nearly 5-year long process of trying to do Shannon's story justice. And we conducted over 40 interviews. I went through every piece of documentation I could find. And at the end of the day, though, it is a challenge in that, Shannon's not here to talk to, and most of her professional life is classified and will be for the foreseeable future. So there were some challenges involved, and certainly in the naval special warfare community became a little bit media shy in the wake of some other events happening around the same time. And, hey, when we started this, it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and all sorts of challenges along the way. But here we are, like I said, 5 years later. And I think this story is the best we did with what we had to work with. And until, maybe it's 25, 50 years from now, her sort of professional life gets declassified, I think this is the best that we can do to capture Shannon Kent and hopefully inspire, not just, memorialize her, but inspire future generations.
Right.
I know this will be mandatory reading for my daughters when they get older.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree. It is nothing short of inspiring, and it really did such a great job encapsulating who she was as a person, starting from when she was a little girl, wanting to take the book from her parents and read, and just the monkey bar story. It was just like, I feel like it was it like made her seem like such an extraordinary person, but someone that you feel like you could know
Yeah.
as well, and it just very personable. But I will say, like, there were some parts where I was like, I want more. Like, how great would it be if we could hear this from
Yeah.
Shannon and just get inside her head? I'm sure you felt that a lot while writing it. What were like, if you could ask her some questions, what would they be like?
There was, one thing that I've thought about a lot. In the book, there's a chapter where she's writing a paper for school, for college, right? And we put a lot of that actual paper in the book. And one of the things she talks about is how she'd had certain leaders let her down in the past and certain things that happened. I don't know what those specific things were. I don't know. And I would love to ask her, like, what happened? What drove you as an NCO, as a senior non-commissioned officer, to do better than that, right? Like I'm a firm believer that you learn something from everybody, right? Sometimes it's what to do, sometimes it's what not to do. And I think that's particularly true when you're looking at leadership qualities. Everybody's had experience with good and bad leaders. And sometimes you're saying, hey, I want to emulate this leader. And others you're saying, okay, I need to do the exact opposite of this person. And certainly Shannon had her share of both. And in that particular college paper, she was referencing something that had happened in her past with some leaders she'd had. And I don't know what that was, and I would love to know that. And then there's sort of just a lot of other questions where, like, hey, we were both in the same task force for a while. I would love to compare notes with her and see how her working on the intel side may have impacted what the folks on my side were doing, and just do that sort of just compare notes about the common places that we've been. And
Right.
gosh, even there's some things of just, hey, I would love to be Shannon. How do I better manage my time? You clearly were an expert at it. Like, she
Right.
seemed to have had a 25th hour in the day or an 8th day in the week that the rest of us just didn't have. And I mean, gosh, she could probably be on the speaking tour circuit right now, just going around telling people how to better organize their lives and accomplish goals. Like,
Yeah.
she was an incredibly organized person, from what I can tell, that just, there's nothing that would stop her from knocking down goals. Whatever she wanted to do and set her mind to do, she accomplished, right?
Mhm.
Even in death, one thing that she left maybe was unfinished business at the time of her death, which was changing the Navy policy about being able to assess as an officer, despite things in your medical background. There are officers in the Navy today because of the fight that she fought, but that change didn't happen until after her death. So there was literally, even in death, nothing she couldn't accomplish. I just think that that's so incredible. And yeah, I'm sad that I never actually got to talk to her in person. It makes me genuinely sad that I never had the pleasure. And yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Especially you feel like you know her. You feel like this is someone you know after going through her whole life and meeting so many important people to her. It's funny that you said that, because that's why I asked the question, because reading her paper, I was like, I just want to know what happened with these leaders, and I just know there's such a story behind there, and obviously I wanted to know how she received that situation, because she kind of, she kept going. She didn't let it get in the way of what she was pursuing. Like, that determinism was just incredible. And I'm sure there's a lot of stories that you heard about Shannon, and maybe that came up during the interview process, that you couldn't fit into the book. Is there any that you could share?
So there's certainly some stories that I couldn't put in the book.
Okay.
Um, Gosh, I would have to reference my notes. Yeah, there was, I tried to be selective in, especially the sort of the vignettes about her growing up and her early years. I really tried to focus on ones that I felt I could, one, paint a picture around, but also, two, foreshadowed who she would become later in life. The monkey bar story is a great example of, we kind of introduced this person who is determined and willing to do almost anything, right, from a very young age. And you see that later. Same thing with that sort of vignette in the horse stalls with the language and kind of getting hit on by the other groomers, and she knew the language already, and it's kind of foreshadowing her talent with language. Yeah, I'd have to reference my notes as far as real specifics. The things that jump to my mind right now are the ones that I can't say.
Right, of course.
But I am certain that there were ones that I, just were like, hey, this is maybe, different story, but sending the same message, as something we already had in the book, and maybe I don't need that. And also too, just recognizing like, hey, people aren't picking up this book for like what she did in 5th grade, right? Like, so we want to just kind of put a couple of sort of early vignettes in there, and then quickly move along to get to her military career and then her family life. Because I think that her military career and her relationship with Joe and her as a mother are the sort of 3 most compelling things in this book. And we wanted to get to the meat of the story as quickly as we could as well. So.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But someone who's been through boot camp and A school and all that, like I loved reading about it because I could picture it all because I had been there.
Yeah.
I didn't go to language school. I took the D lab, but oh my gosh. So I personally understand how hard that was, that made up language that they make up.
Yeah.
I failed.
So one question I have for you, I mean, you are a Navy veteran. You have been to a lot of the same places here. You could probably explain the difference between rate and rank in the Navy far better than even I could at this point. It was a real education for me,
Really?
diving into this. Yeah, as an Army veteran, the Navy is a very foreign culture to me. There's a different story for a different time about how I found out the hard way that a captain in the Navy is not the same as a captain in the Army.
Yes.
But you as a Navy veteran, how did you feel? Did I get all the Navy stuff right? Was there anything you're like, you're close but not quite? I mean, how did the Navy stuff? Did it pass your sniff test?
No, there's nothing that stood out to me at all. The only thing, though, the one thing is when you had the article, The Legend of Chief.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to put Senior Chief in there. That's
So
the only thing.
when we wrote the article, she was posthumously promoted to Senior Chief.
Oh,
So at the time of the article, she was still Chief Shannon Kent.
I did not know that. Okay, then yeah, it was very very sound.
Yeah, it was a posthumous promotion, but certainly a promotion where she would have made Senior Chief. I'm certain, but yeah, that was a posthumous promotion that happened, I believe, shortly after the article was published. Or you know what? That's something for me to look back on, because I am not sure what the I think posthumous promotions are effective the date of their death, but I don't remember when the posthumous promotion went through.
Okay.
So that's something for me to check on for sure. But at the time of her death, at least, she was Chief Shannon Kent at that time.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So that was on point. Absolutely. So I'm kind of curious, how was writing this knowing that the DoD was going to have to look over it and scan anything? Did that kind of change how you wrote it?
Yeah, a little bit, but I'd already been through that process once with my first book, Violence of Action. So there were things that I knew to write around, and I just generally, from the special operations community myself, was able to understand, okay, here's the things that I know for a fact are going to be sensitive and they're not going to want to see in this book. And here's the things that I feel reasonably confident are going to be safe to put in there. And of course, I had also the eyes of Joe Kent, who spent a lot more time in the special operations community at a much higher level, who also was putting eyes on this and also flagging anything but for the most part, I believe he and I were both sort of on the same page as far as what to put in, what not to put in, or what to write around. Certainly we didn't want to endanger any of Shannon's teammates that are still out there in the fight. Didn't want to jeopardize any future operations. So OPSEC and PERSEC were definitely paramount. As far as both the Department of Defense and the CIA did a pre-publication review on it, and the notes were really light. I think we generally did a pretty good job. There were a few head scratchers in there for redactions, that if we wanted to make a big deal out of it, I'm sure we could have appealed or something, but like we just left them as is. It wasn't worth prolonging the process
Right.
before we published over them. And then there was a few things that were literally, I was told to change in the first book, but then were redacted in this one. And I won't use the specific examples for if they want it redacted. I'm not going to bring it up here. But over a beer sometime, I'll tell you, like, yeah, it was weird.
Yeah.
This is what they wanted when I did it, almost 10 years ago now in Violence of Action. But in this one, they wanted it redacted, and yeah, so there was a few surprises in there. But for the most part, the redactions were really very light. And I think that we generally did a really good job sort of anticipating what should or shouldn't be in the book.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Because I've read books where there's whole paragraphs blacked out, and it takes so much away because you're really lost because there was probably some other details in there. But it didn't take away anything from the story, the narrative at all at that point. And what was because you couldn't interview Shannon herself, most of this is written through interviews, and you can kind of tell that it is written by like through text messages you received or conversations.
Yep.
How was piecing all of that together to form a cohesive story?
That is exactly why that's where I make my money, right? Like that's trying to accomplish that was definitely a chore. I'll say as far as like the process and the craft of this, we started off. Joe and I got together and kind of locked ourselves in an Airbnb and took graph paper, and I put down notes, and we just put her entire life in chronological order on a series of sheets of graph paper. And then I had little mini post-it notes. Actually, these are like literally some of the ones that I use. These little skinny ones like this.
Okay.
And I write on there like, deployment started here to Iraq, ended here, graduated DLI here, Colt born on this day, and then I would color code them. So things that were Shannon's military career would be one color, things that were Shannon's personal life another color, and then on the opposite side of the horizontal line that I had as a through line on there, on the bottom side of it would be these outer events. So you notice like a lot of the chapters are about like ISIS and these larger developments that impacted Shannon. Those would go in a different color below the line. And so then we're able to match up like, oh, Shannon had a baby right when this was going on. And hey, this deployment matched up with that. Like it helped make sense of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so of course, with the book, as I started doing interviews and getting stories, I would continue to put new things on that graph so that like, hey, when she got together with this friend for sushi, it happened in this year around these other things. Oh, she would have just gotten back from her Europe trip around this time. Or oh, wow, she was like 6 months pregnant at this time. It really helped you put together the broader picture of, Ed, what's going on, buddy? It was great to see you in Salt Lake the other day. It helped put together a more cohesive picture, and I think that you saw as you were reading out of that first, this kind of put you right in the action and drop in right off the bat. After that first chapter, we kind of go back, and it's largely chronological the rest of the book, and I think that was really the only way to do it. Otherwise, it just would have been, I think the chronology helped build the tension. And what I was really hoping is we spend a lot of time doing character development, right? Doing these different, like her little training trip down to New Orleans where they got in trouble in the voodoo bar and stuff like that. Like these little things that were just help build character and do what I hope made everybody feel like they really got to know her. So, and then everybody knows it's moving chronologically. So as you get to a certain point in the book, you're starting to look for off ramps. And we tried to provide them, like the PhD program, these different things that like maybe she would get off this way that had her screaming towards disaster. And we wanted people to feel like be screaming at the book like, no, don't do that, or please do that, like, because you know what's coming. And as you can feel the book getting thinner in your hand if you're reading the physical book, right? You're like, oh my God, I know I'm getting closer. I know I'm getting closer. I know I'm getting closer. But you've gotten to hopefully know Shannon so well at that point that you have this dread that I don't want to keep reading. I know what's coming. And that's what I really tried to use the chronology to drive that home. So at the point when it does come, that maybe everybody else who never had the honor of meeting her in real life felt even like 1/1000th of the loss that
Yeah.
Joe and her family and her team felt that day. Even just 1/1000th, maybe even less. But feel that, and then maybe we've accomplished our mission, right? Of knowing that this was a terrible loss for our country. And man, I like we're all just, our prospects in the future are just a little less because Shannon is not here. And and hopefully, yeah, we want to inspire people with this book, but also, gosh, I really wanted to drive home that loss, and the best way to do that was just to set this up chronologically to where you were on a one-way track towards disaster. And I look to other movies and stories out there that have done a similar thing where it's a you know, you kind of know what's going to happen, right? And like most famously, I'll just use the example of like the story of Jesus Christ, right? Like everybody kind of knows how that ends. So how do you tell that story in a compelling way? You know what I mean? Like, and there's other examples in history and things like that where you kind of know, famous assassinations or things like that, like where it's like, okay, everybody knows that this is going to happen, but maybe you can get them so absorbed in a story that they've almost convinced themselves that it won't happen if they just
Yep.
quit reading at this part. Maybe it won't come true if I don't read it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was trying to accomplish with that.
No, absolutely. I think you had myself, as many other readers, rooting for an alternative ending. Surprise, somehow she's still out there and she knows about the. Yeah, definitely. And also, what I really liked was that first chapter, how it opened up talking about the meeting, and so I was thinking that was the end. Somehow that turned into a disaster, like somehow, because I didn't know the details of how she died. I didn't know about the suicide bomber. Yeah, so I was like, I thought that was the end, and I waited to read it last night because the night before I was like, I can't read it. Like I don't want her life to end, even if it's just through me. Like because while reading it, like she was real. Mm-hmm. So you guys did an amazing job, and something that I really admired was how Joe was so vulnerable and talking about that must be really hard to think about like I wanted to do more and like Shannon told me not to, but he even said like I was being selfish and coming to terms with that. How is that talking to him about that and then writing that?
Joe deserves so much credit, and a lot of those conversation between him and Shannon, that was Joe writing, to get that dialogue between them, some of the home stuff between them where they were struggling with their careers. I mean, Joe deserves so much credit for this, like he really does. And one, during all of this, every conversation that we had, everything, he was an even keel. He is so motivated to tell Shannon's story and make sure that her memory remains alive. Yeah. I mean, it was really admirable how mission focused he was, despite tackling just the worst day of his life, right? And just the thing that he would have never in a million years wanted to happen, but tackling that through the telling of the story with grace every step of the way. And then even in his telling of some of these conversations, I mean, he was very he made himself, I mean, he's not like you're kind of rooting for Shannon in some of these conversations, right? Like and Joe, is kind of admitting out loud, like, yeah, I was a little bit selfish in some of these and wanting to continue my career and stuff. But it's almost like an admirable selfishness because at the end of the day, He is just trying to want to continue serving his country. That's an admirable thing. It's this gray area that just like, yeah, that's why they had arguments over it, right? Because there were two right answers. It was just which one was more right for them and their family. And it's just, gosh, I hope with all this, like I said, Joe just deserves so much credit for putting that out there and being so brutally honest about everything. I really do hope that there's a lot of other military families out there that read this and couples that are like, oh, even at Joe and Shannon's level, I mean, peak high performers, they were dealing with the same stuff that me and my spouse deal with. And even outside of the military, where you've got, a lot of couples out there where both spouses are very career driven, career focused people. And sometimes that puts you at odds with each other, right? And this book, I just, if anything, maybe it makes them feel like they're not alone, or maybe gives them a view. Thanks, Ted. Um, Maybe um, it just provides some sort of comfort in that, like, hey, we're not alone, or we're not the only people that have ever dealt with this, and here's sort of what the outside looking in looks like on the same conversations we've had personally in our relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Right. Right. And another thing that I wanted to talk about with you was how you put right on the title, A Mother at War. And I think that's kind of, very eye-catching, very kind of maybe even abrasive to some people, because I think, people say like war is no place for a mother. And I thought you guys did such a great job in describing her passion and just the reality of what's it like to be in that high level of a community, and feel guilt. Like, she felt guilt when she was at home, and then because she wanted to be with her team, or felt like she wasn't supporting, and then she felt the guilt when she was there because of her kids. I thought it was so great how you portrayed that, and something that our society, it's actually very new in our culture for women to be at war, let alone a mother.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of examples in history of cultures that have absolutely used women in warfare. And I even look at Shannon, I look at her predecessors in World War II, people like Virginia Hall. You know, I think there are examples. But yes, I mean, certainly war has been seen as a masculine endeavor largely and throughout history, certainly. I'm not going to pretend like the exceptions are the rule. That they're not. It is largely a masculine endeavor, a responsibility that is usually society's hoist upon the males. Sure, but um, the great, the great thing I think about our military and our country is we need to we find talent and we use that in our war and endeavors. And there were things that Shannon was able to do that nobody else was able to do, and that's how she found herself at wars, because she could do things nobody else could do. Not because she was a woman or a man, but because she was the right person for the job, and regardless of gender, right? And certainly, yeah, it's going to pull at the heartstrings a little bit that she was a mom, she was a wife, she was a sister, she was a daughter, she was all these things. And you almost, I'm sure there's a lot of men out there that, are like, hey, that's the reason I went to war, so that my sister didn't have to go, or that my mom didn't have to go, right? Like, there's probably a lot of guys that think that. But, like, in Shannon's case, guess what? If somebody else could do it, where were they?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that there's not other great service members out there, or other people that can't speak multiple languages, or whatever, but Shannon was doing the job that her country called upon her to do, and it was an admirable thing. And that was a conversation her and Joe had, where they would say, she would say, like, hey, if she was on the other foot, you've had to leave your kids behind. Why am I any different? Right?
Yeah.
And really hard thing to swallow. It really is. And one thing that does bother me, though, is since the book is released, I've seen it in multiple sort of comment sections anytime we posted about the book, where somebody or multiple people are like, what are we doing as a country if we're sending our mothers to war, we're sending our women to war? Not the question to ask. Not the question to ask. And at the end of the day, if we're serious about winning wars, then we should be, right? We should be serious. If we're going to venture into warfare, we should be very serious about winning them, and winning them as quickly as we can, to avoid any further loss of life, innocent or otherwise, right? To do that, we need the best people for the job in every position. I don't care if you're a cook, a linguist, an infantryman, anything, a fighter jet pilot. We need the best people in those jobs in order to win our wars and win them quickly. And Shannon was the best person for the position in a lot of those things, as hard as that is to swallow for a lot of folks. But no, a woman's place isn't at home in the kitchen. It's wherever she is, her talents are best leveraged, whether that's the kitchen, the office, the executive suite, in a police cruiser, on a fire truck, or on the front lines of combat undercover in Syria.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a great point. What a question. Like, what are we doing as a country if we're sending, like we're going around recruiting mothers, sending them to war? it takes away from the whole point of it. And like early on in the book, like Shannon knew she had a talent for language, and she went to the recruiter saying, "Hey, how can I use this in the Navy? Like, please use me. Like, send me." That like it's just such a perfect title for it. You know, when you were in, did you serve with many women?
No. So I did the last couple of years that I was in, I was a recruiter, and that was kind of my first time ever serving alongside women. And they were awesome people. I'm still friends with a few of them to this day. Awesome people. But when I was in at the time an all male unit, and the only exposure I had to women on deployments is they typically were working in sort of some sort of intelligence fashion, but I didn't work closely with them. I definitely, in my sort of uh, my war fighting days, it was a very male endeavor. And any women were the exception, not the rule. And they, again, typically they weren't going out with us on target or anything like that. They were typically interrogators or intelligence analysts or things like that. So no, I, until I was a conflict reporter, I don't think I'd been out on, in combat with women, but in my army days, like deploying, I don't think I was ever on target with a woman. If it was an exception, but not that I can recall. I don't think I was ever on target with a woman.
Wow. So reading and hearing about what Shannon was doing, that was probably kind of a shock to you, or
Well,
just like,
I did come from the special operations community, so I was kind of aware that there was probably, somebody out there somewhere doing something like Shannon at a high level. You just kind of assume, just like any of us, right, that there's these Jason Bourne types, like real life, out there doing the thing. But you don't know, and you don't see them or anything. So if anything, this story was kind of confirmation that our suspicions were correct. Of like, yeah, there's these like really badass women out there like getting after it. I just, me personally, I had never come across it when I was in the military.
yeah. Another great thing you guys painted of Shannon was just her connection. How she could make connections with people, and definitely with her connections with the Iraqi forces. And she was this kind of unknown like legend of Shame, which was her
Shayma, yeah,
Shema, which was her Arab name, and that was just cool to think about. Like like Joe had already heard of
yeah,
her, and that was his confirmation that
yeah.
she was real. And was there anything that he had learned more about her, or he probably already knew all of it?
I don't know what specifically, but on a few interviews, he's been asked that question of, "Hey, did you learn anything new with what Marty wrote in this book?" And he said yes. I don't know which specific parts were new to him, but you figure him and Shannon, they met once briefly in 2007 for like 10 minutes, but then they didn't really meet again until it was like 2013 or 2014, and start dating and stuff. So really, it wasn't. It was only about the last 5-6 years of her life that he really knew her. And of course, just like any couple, you always fill each other in on your backstory and stuff, but it's usually the fence posts, sort of the big highs, big lows, right?
Right.
um like before I met my wife, right, like I couldn't tell you in detail every little story that she experienced before we met. I can, where she went to high school and like sports she played, and just sort of the general sort of high level stuff, right? But similar for Joe. So I think a lot of the stuff that I found like pre the meeting, some of it was probably familiar, but maybe in more detail. And then there's maybe some other things that were maybe new. I know specifically I was able to find a few pictures of her that he hadn't seen before. And I think that was pretty cool. But yeah, I know that there was like new information in there for Joe, but I couldn't point to like what specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, wow. Pictures that he hadn't seen. I mean, how cool is that? And I want to show real quick just the pictures, because like at first when he closed the book, I didn't know there was pictures until I actually got to that page. So I turned the page, and like reading about Shannon, and you see her photo,
Mhm.
her official military photo, and it's just like, wow, she's she's like a real person, you know. I mean, I saw
Yeah.
Chiefs all the time. It was just like, wow, like, and also because I served in 2015 and 2016 when she was talking about fighting ISIS in Syria, and it was just, I didn't know all the details behind it, and I liked how you went in and kind of filled the reader in on what was happening in the world with like the Kurdish forces, Turkey, Russia, like
Yeah.
all of that. It was such a proxy war there, and I was on deployment in the East Med and in the Gulf, and we were just dropping bombs, and I you know, I tried to figure out what we were doing with so much of it, but you
Yeah.
know, like I was able to read about it, and it was just kind of like validating that, like, yeah, it was really going on bad guys, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, specifically your picture though, that's one kind of cool thing. I've specifically talked to like guys that have, been like, oh, I don't know how to say this respectfully, but like, good job, Joe. like, like beautiful, smart, uh, ass kicking warrior. Like, good job, Joe. Like, what a catch. And I think
Yeah.
I felt the same way, like getting to know her a little bit of like, wow, yeah, like good job, Joe. Like you guys were a power couple, and Joe's such a handsome fellow himself. I just can imagine like those two were such a power couple, like just a
I
real life
know.
Mr. and Mrs. Smith, right? Like the movie, like just both incredible people, incredible in their profession, both highly intelligent, both so loving. Um, yeah, and so that picture specifically was the last picture they took together as a family before that is their last family picture.
Wow.
And it really drives it home, right? Like you look at like last
Here's another one for
yeah,
those on the live.
and you can see in that picture that cut across, that laceration across her throat. She just had the cancer cut out shortly before that picture. And from what I understand, she didn't miss that. Like I guess she wasn't even on a temporary profile. She didn't want to be put on one. She just like got the surgery done and then like went right back to work as soon as she got out of the hospital. Like what?
I know, and I feel like so many people would have taken that as their sign to slow down or to stop because, you know, like, but she was like, oh, just another day. Like, let's keep going. I got stuff
Just
to
got
do.
the cancer cut out. That's all. No big deal.
Yeah.
Brain damage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even how she texted Joe just nonchalantly saying, got some cancer cut out, no big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah. And Joe had no idea, and it was just very much her, right? Didn't want to worry him or anything, and she probably didn't want to build it up too much in her own head. Just on mission, eyes on the horizon, keep putting one foot in front of the other, and keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it was also crazy to think about how she was having thyroid issues, and you know that really messes with your tiredness and just your hormones in general, and she was dealing with that while also accomplishing, you know, pursuing her doctorates, you know, just doing so much
Yeah.
while also like battling that like thyroid issue. Just what an incredible person. You know, since reading this, I haven't taken one day for granted.
Yeah.
I've hugged my kids a little harder, you know, and I appreciate when they're stubborn because, you know, I think that's just a trait of being determined, giving them grace for that. And I just, yeah, well done. Like,
Thank you.
this is amazing.
Yeah, I really hope it's. I'm really glad to get your seal of approval on it. Again, you're somebody. When we talked, so a little backstory, right? We met at a conference in November, and I think I told you about this book right then when we were talking. And it was, I think I probably told you like, hey, you're specifically somebody that is like the target demographic, female veteran that knows what it's like, and hey, I really hope that this book passes your approval, right? Because that means if somebody like you likes it, thought it was well done, then we did our job right, you know. And I'd like to think, Jenna, that like Shannon is somebody that would look at you and if you would ever come across her, she would have been that she came across you and said, hey Sailor, everything going okay? Need anything? Anything I can do? She was that type of leader, and you can just, again, because you were in the Navy, you can just about imagine that interaction, I bet, and the type of chief she was. She took those anchors very seriously. She put if the worst happened, wanted that fee of Kathy, had her deliver exactly what she got. And she took, running chief season very seriously. She took that part of the job, the mentorship, the leadership part of the job. It wasn't just about being some cool guy special operator. She took her job as a leader in the United States Navy very seriously.
Yes, yeah, and we didn't even touch on her passion for mental health, and that's what she wanted to do after having a leader, commit suicide while she was deployed, and just want to prevent that from happening. I'm sure she saw it around her a lot, and just her dedication to her friend, that interaction, telling his chain of command that he needed support. It's just like, I wish I would have came across her. I would probably maybe even still be in uniform if I had a leader like that, just someone to look up to and know, like, hey, you can be the change. You don't have to settle for this. So incredible stuff, Marty. We are coming up on time, so I just wanted to give you a chance. Is there anything else I can help you share about this book? Where can people get it? And any upcoming things you have, any upcoming podcasts that you're going to be on?
Yeah, so the book is available, anywhere books are sold. It's likely at your local Barnes and Noble. It's definitely on all the online retailers. One thing I would encourage people is, hey, is this in your kids? If you got a kid in high school, ask them if they've got this book in the library, and if so, if not, hey, can we get it in there? This is a good book for that age group for sure. Is in your local public library. If you do go into your local bookstore and they don't have it in stock, hey, when are you going to get it in stock? Really, we want this story to be told as far and wide as possible. If you've got the book, either lend it to a friend and tell them to read it, or buy them one, whatever. Like, I'm not trying to make this like a monetary thing. Like, spread the story any way you know how. If you've read the book, share what parts stood out to you or impacted you online. Also, reviews on Amazon or Goodreads really help us. Please, if you thought this was good, or if you didn't, like, I'm not here to censor people's opinions, but please go leave reviews. I do have a hunch that I think most people will think this was pretty well done, though. So please help us spread the word. We want Shannon's and Zeitgeist. There is sort of, there's that old saying, right? A warrior two deaths, once on the battlefield and once when their name has been spoken for the last time. We are trying to prevent a second death for Shannon Kent. I think the more we can tell her story, speak her name, inspire other people, have her place in the history books, like, is it just Virginia Hall or even just Betsy Ross or other notable women in American history. This is somebody that we want our kids to look up to. My second daughter, she's 3 years old right now. Her middle name is after Shannon. And both my daughters, when they are sort of appropriate age, in my mind, because of some of the ISIS details in there, it's like 13, 14 maybe.
Right.
They're going to read this book when they're about that age, and I just think it's so important to tell them. And even my daughter, even if she hasn't read it yet, she wanted to take it to school for show and tell. And so with that, I was like, okay, what are 5 facts about Shannon Kent? If you're going to take this book to show and tell, it's not going to be just about, hey, look at my dad wrote a book. It's not about me. It's not about the book. It's about Shannon. Go, like, hey, and so she's got her 5 facts about Shannon Kent. She's ready to tell people at any moment. And so I think the more we can share the story, share the legend of Shannon Kent, right? The better off. So the book is available just about anywhere. And I encourage people to check it up, recommend it to friends, all that sort of stuff. And then as far as future stuff, definitely check out our reporting over at taskandpurpose.com. They've been very gracious. My team there has been very gracious as I've been sort of out promoting the book and everything like that, with making sure all the bases are covered, and we're still getting good news stories out on a daily basis. And they do some really great work over there. So that's taskandpurpose.com. And I got, on a personal note, got to figure out what the next story is. So don't know what that'll be yet, but my sort of passion at this point is telling these important stories, and I, want to keep doing that. So, yeah. And, I'll see you in Pennsylvania
Yes.
coming up here. Our mutual friend is putting on a pretty cool event, and we're going to go sit on a panel.
Yes, I'm very excited. For anyone listening, Operation Honor, in McConnellsburg, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Should be.
I see Clint Emerson just joined on, another famous frogman out there. It's really cool to see. Um, it's really cool to see the NSW community's reaction to this stuff, and she was such an important part of that. And I've told multiple. I met with a guy today who was a SEAL back in the '90s and was telling me, like, yeah, so they ended up setting up this program for support, direct support to the SEAL teams, and they called the direct support course. And Shannon was the first woman to go through it and graduated. She graduated #2 in her class on that. It was such a sort of issue for her that she was the first to do that, but that when she went to go get it entered into her official Navy records, they didn't believe her, so she had to fight to get that she had graduated this direct support course even into her Navy records. And I found out just recently that so her name is on the memorial wall at the NSA, and I just found out recently that there was initial resistance to having her name on the wall because people, things are so compartmentalized in that world. People initially were like, oh no, she doesn't belong on this wall. She probably belongs on some other wall. That was really sort of eye-opening to me of how even in death there was fights that needed to be fought on her behalf to get her the recognition she deserved. So, and the great part about it, and I know, like you said, we're coming up on time and I could just talk all night about this, but the thing was that she comes from a community of quiet professionals, and that word is thrown around a lot by a lot of people that are anything but quiet. Her community, it is absolutely commendable that they are devoted to, if our stories are ever told, they will only be told in death. We would not know Shannon's story or stories from her community if it were not for the fact that she did die in combat, that she was killed in action, and that's how we know this story. If she would have lived a long life, it would have taken her exploits to the grave with her, and it's really commendable that the community that she comes from, they are quiet professionals doing the hard, important work on behalf of all of us. It's really commendable, and she's not the only woman. I'm not going to name them by name, but there's one particular woman that has a very similar background to Shannon that's currently serving at a very high level in special operations on the public side, and people accuse her of the worst, thinking that she was only put there as some sort of political move or something. It's like, no, you have no idea what this woman has done, and she got a very Shannon. And it's so important that we recognize and just understand too that a lot of people, they come from backgrounds where they just can't talk about what they did in uniform, or more accurately in these cases, in a pair of Solomons and with a Glock on their waistband. It's not always in uniform, some of these things. So anyways, I could keep going, but it's an important worth knowing. I really want people to go, and it's so important. So
Yeah.
Jenna, thank you
No.
for having me on.
Marty, thank you so much for coming on. And no, I love the passion. I mean, you could just tell it by reading it. I mean, everything it shows how important this is, and it is so cool how Shannon gets to live on and continue to impact people through this book, through her story, and that's such a great point that we wouldn't have known this story, and because they're very quiet professionals, and I think you kind of hinted at that in the book when she was in Maryland and trying to be friends with her neighbors, and she could just live this other life. She just compartmentalized it. It was very cool. But anyone who's watching, please, if you haven't gotten this book yet, I'm gonna have the link in my story. Check it out. You will not be disappointed. I want to thank everyone who joined the live, or if you're listening to the replay, I hope you enjoyed this. And Marty, again, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, and let's do it again sometime.
Yes, absolutely. All right. I'll see ya.